Dennis, it's great to see you today.
Great to see you, Jason. Thanks for having me today.
So, there's a lot going on right now. As you've seen, in Syria, the Assad regime, which has been firmly installed for so long, is really teetering on the brink. And Russia has a huge vested interest in making sure that does not happen. Yet, there's been plenty of videos that come out showing that Russian troops have abandoned some of their bases, and things are just getting worse and worse for Russia's interest in Syria. What's going down there?
Well, it's the major breakthrough. I think it was mainly supported by the key allies of Syria, like rebels, and they're obviously backed from the Turkish side. So we see the external force influencing this new stage of the conflict in Syria. And honestly, I think that Russian army there and Assad army were really surprised because of that event. They were unable to secure the second largest city, Aleppo. They just left it with almost no fights. And recently, yesterday we had the news that Assad forces were granted the free exit from Aleppo for exchange of ceasing fire. Just they left to the Assad-controlled territory. But Assad-controlled territory shrinks. And we also see the activation also from the United States of America and how they back the Kurdish side. And in province of Deir ez-Zor, they managed to use aviation and gain the access of the crucial area actually across the river. And this area on the northeastern side of Syria is actually very important because the most of the oil is located over there. But still everything may change in Syria because it's still a long way to go for rebels to reach, for example, Damascus. The key fight is now going for the Hama city, and Assad was capable to gain the resources, and now they are trying to make some sort of the defense. But clearly, they were caught off guard with this attack. But I think it's the influence basically of the external players like Turkey. So Turkey sees that Russia is losing its influence abroad. Before they were able to secure the Assad's regime, and they had this reputation of the force which may secure some of the dictators elsewhere. But now it seems like Russia has no other choice than abandon at least partially Assad because they're very busy in Ukraine actually. So two of the Russian main bases are now under the great threat from the rebel forces, and I think the coming weeks will show whether rebels will be able to cross the mountains area to go to the Hmeimim Russian Navy base, Russian air base, which is crucial for Russia, especially for the supplement also of their proxy forces in Mali, for example, and other states of Africa. So they managed to push French forces out in Mali, and now they're very dependent on their airfield in Syria. So it's a very big, complex game. Complex conflict is better to say, with many of the forces involved. So now we see how Russia fails there in Syria, but whether it will be the major failure, we don't know so far. But clearly, maybe United States and Turkey play the common role in this escalation, because we see the escalation from both of the side, from the rebels, from the Kurdish side. It was maybe negotiated escalation, and maybe also to push Russia for the future negotiations in Ukraine. It could be the bigger game even there. So maybe they may propose, to cease pushing Assad regime, and for Russia, to negotiate around the Ukrainian topic and around the global defense, actually.
So it's definitely talk about negotiations. But I agree with you fully. I see that Russia is struggling. We see it struggling not only in Syria, we see it struggling to expel the Ukrainian soldiers from Kursk Oblast. As we see, Russia's having problems in Georgia with the pro-Russia candidate who was elected there. We see in the case of Moldova, the pro-European candidate won, despite the fact that Russia tried its best to influence those elections. So things aren't going well. But I have a theory. My theory is that one of the reasons is that the Russian economy itself is just collapsing. It's getting worse and worse. Just recently, in the course of one day, it lost more than 10% of its value, the ruble. And that's just not normal. That's not healthy. In addition, they have an inflation rate that's above 28%. They have a key interest rate of 21%, and it's definitely going to go up higher and higher. So Russia's economy is a mess. Do you think that's playing a role in this? What have you noticed?
Yes, obviously, like global players, they notice that the Russian economy is not that efficient. So it's time like to push Russia in Syria because Russian army just cannot afford, spending the funds to fight abroad. The Russian defense industry itself, the head of the defense industry of the Russian Federation complained that the nearby future of the Russian economy is stagflation. It's basically inflation with demand, lowering demand of the buying of people. People cannot buy goods, and there is the high inflation. So I don't remember any kind of this case of the stagflation from any sort of the countries for the nearby future. So it's very, very crucial for Russia. And actually, on other side, we see how Russians are still, they live well, but it's only because of their military sector. But that cannot continue for a very long time because military sector produces the stuff that just used to evaporate in Ukrainian front lines or to assassinate some of the people there. So it is not bringing anything to the Russian economy. There is no added value to the military production. And Russia, they agreed to spend 145 billion United States dollars for the next year for their military budget. It means that they are not willing to stop. From what I see, they are not ready to negotiate at this point. They want to take more ground, but at the same time, it just ruins their economy. And the key rate was raised and it's predicted to be raised by 20 for around 24-25% the next year, but some experts say 27%. It makes impossible for the banks to loan cash from the central bank. It makes impossible for people to buy apartments. The credit, like the interest rate is almost 40%. So it's just crazy for the normal people there. The cars are expensive, everything is expensive. And we see how, what is interesting, that the fuel price is still okay. So the Russian budget is, they forecasted the price of around $70 per barrel. The price now is that. And even with this good oil price, the Russian economy goes to stagflation. So what might happen if, for example, new White House administration promised to lower significantly the oil prices, they would just go deeper into the dive, and I expect that the course of the Russian ruble relative to dollar will be 150, maybe 130 with something the next year. It's just imminent with the inflation, with the crazy inflation they have. Interesting that also on the paper they have inflation just by 9%, but it's not real if you just go to the Russian shops. So the economy cannot work just for military industry for a very long time. At least the economy they have right now. So the Russian Federation is not that powerful as, for example, Soviet Union used to be. And even Soviet Union struggled in Afghanistan for more than 10 years of war, and it was one of the main factors actually for the Soviet Union to collapse. So maybe Ukrainian war will be one more factor for the Russian economy to collapse because they cannot afford losses and to produce, basically to put all of their funds to the military. For a long time, it's just the end of their economy and of their country could be.
Absolutely. I fully agree. Just look, the cost of potatoes has gone up 72%. There's shortages of basic goods, such as butter. But now, looking ahead, how's Russia going to find more soldiers? We know that they've been paying a very high premium to get people to join the military. At this point, the Russian army is full of guys that had huge debts to pay and had no other way to pay them. Now, it's attractive at first, but there's a problem. When the ruble loses all its value, what are you doing there? Is it worth dying for something that won't even get you out of the problems that you had? I don't see any way they're going to recruit more soldiers. And I think the morale in the Russian military will continue to decline. What have you seen?
Yes, well, for now, the Russian currency is not dropping that hard, so it's not the marking like the end of the Russian economy, but the inflation does. As you say, like potato price rise by 70%. So the rate of ruble drops by 10% for the recent time, and also the inflation goes up. So we have two of the components of this stagflation. So, and definitely the buying capability of Russian soldiers dropped dramatically, but still, the weapon of the Russian regime is the poverty outside Moscow and St. Petersburg. So people live their poor lives. They have lots of the credits, loans, and now recently, like a couple of weeks ago, Putin signed the order or petition, whatever, to forgive the debt for the Russian men if they're basically willing to join the Russian army. So they are looking for the possible solutions to get more volunteers for now to the Russian army. But I think that if the current situation with the Russian losses continues for a few more months, they will be forced to announce a new massive mobilization, which will be not popular. But for the last couple of years, they prepared everything for new mobilization to be started and for it to be more effectively compared to what it was in 2022. Then it was not really organized. Now they're more organized and they are doing it through the electronic way. So they may basically block people's passports, they may block driving license and basically cut people from their social life if they are not willing to go to the Russian army.
So at this stage, a lot of people are talking about peace talks beginning. But I think Russia itself, not just Ukraine, which is usually what the focus of the news stories is, that Ukraine wants to start talks. It's Russia that might need to start talks. Given how bad the situation is, it's simply untenable to continue as Russia today is fighting. What do you make of all this about peace talks?
Well, it's kind of complicated. Like, according to the recent news, we have Ukraine say that the only security guarantee for Ukraine for the stable peace is the NATO membership. We understand that there are many countries in NATO which are against that, including United States and Germany, the key players and participants of NATO organization. On the Russian side, we see more and more statements, like, for example, from the press secretary of Kremlin, Peskov, who said that they're not looking for the possible ceasefire under the current conditions or the conditions presented by the new White House administration. There were even some of the officials in the Russian government say that they do not agree, like they say that very hard, that they do not agree with that piece of paper they presented, like White House presented to Russia for negotiations. And actually, it's hard for me to define what now we can do with with Russia. Basically, the only option I think right now for Ukraine is to continue to fight, defend itself, and wait for some things happen in Russia, for example, with the economy, for them not to be able to feed their army, for them to start slow down, and maybe in that case Ukraine may take the initiative. But for me personally, I don't say that the peace negotiations are really possible, even though we heard them everywhere, like in the internet and everywhere. But I don't think that Russia still will have something to stop. They still have resources. They still have some of the army men coming. They may announce the new mobilization just in case, because Putin doesn't care about his losses. So for the next year at least, I expect that it will be the same stuff as happened the last year. So fighting, and unfortunately, Ukraine doesn't have enough resources for now. So that's why Russia will get more ground under control. But you know what? Today, Anthony Blinken has announced that probably some of the Russian assets will be confiscated. This initiative came from the G7 countries, and now they agreed that definitely Ukraine may get 50 billion United States dollars for its military sector in the coming weeks. So that may change the picture for Ukraine, and that may help Ukraine to defend itself for the next year. But right now, I don't see how this war could be stopped, because we see that neither of the sides agree on the current conditions on peace deal. Russia wants to take, as they say, Kherson, Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Lugansk oblasts, and Ukraine doesn't agree with any sort of the other guarantees rather than NATO membership. So now we are here, and we'll see how it goes in the coming maybe year.
So, if NATO membership is realistically not going to happen in the short term, as much as we would like it to happen, it's just probably not. So, security guarantees are the great hope. Now, how realistic do you think that is? There's going to be countries willing to have an agreement with Ukraine to defend it should Russia decide to break a peace agreement. Do you think it's realistic or not at all?
I think if honestly, for me, the NATO membership is the only like real guarantee for Ukraine. There could be also some sort of the bipartisan agreement signed with some countries, like for example, United Kingdom. There are some talks even going now. I see it in the media that French forces, together with British forces, might be deployed to Ukraine. But again, those are just now talks, and we have the experience of the Budapest Memorandum, which didn't work, so Ukraine gave up the only robust guarantee for itself, like nuclear weaponry, but those guarantees really do not work. Like President Zelensky also said that it's basically truth. So, and the new security alliance should be based on something. So now we have the only functioning alliance. It's NATO. So I guess it's the only like real robust security guarantee for Ukraine. That's my opinion.
Most certainly. And, there's just so much going on right now all over the world that directly impacts Russia. So, what do you think we should keep an eye on in the coming weeks and months?
Well, I'll better separate two main topics. It's political life and what is happening right now on the front lines in Ukraine and also, by the way, in Syria. So from political point of view, the protests which are happening now in Georgia for 1 week already, and hopefully Russia will lose its influence in Caucasus as well. Honestly, I cannot imagine, Russia attacked Georgia back in 2008 and having like almost openly pro-Russian government is kind of strange for me. So I understand those people who go on the streets and protest against basically the mirror parliament which Russia has. They have implemented the same regulations which just cut the way of the Western development of the country. So I understand like why people are going to the streets. Yet we don't know the outcome of those protests, but still Russia is under the risk to lose one more influence in one more ex-Soviet countries. On the other hand, the elections in Romania, for example, are also very important because the leading candidate who won the first round of elections is against Ukrainian NATO membership, is against European initiatives in his own country. So we should take an eye on that as well. On the front lines, the outcome of the Kursk operation will be interesting for this winter because for Ukraine it will be really difficult to supply its group on the Russian territory because the winter supplies require more developed logistics, and for Ukraine it will be hard to secure the ground. But we see that all of the Russian attacks have been repelled. Today, Russia again went to attack on the Ukrainian positions with infantry forces, and I saw the videos from the drones as usual how the Russian assault was just seized. But nevertheless, for the last few months, Ukraine lost 40% of the controlled territory in Kursk, so we also should keep an eye on it. And on the eastern front lines, I think that Russia will continue to take the ground because they go like all in. They send all of the available volunteers, forces, and military equipment they have. There were some of the rumors that Russia may break through Zaporizhia front lines from the south, but we don't have the evidence that Russia gathered enough forces, enough assault group to break through Ukrainian defense. And from what I know, the defense in the Zaporizhia area is even more robust than the defense on the east. So I guess that Russians will not be able to go to Zaporizhia this winter, but we're going to see.
Well, there's certainly a lot going on right now, and we'll have to keep an eye out for it. Dennis, I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jason.